We'll be covering invasive species of this lecture of the 2020 Master Gardener Extension Volunteer class. The first part will be invasive exotic plants, followed by emerging insect and disease pests. So, essentially, look at it. What is an invasive species? It is a species that are not native to a given ecosystem and whose introduction to that ecosystem causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. Many of the characteristics of invasive plants are the same ones that make them appealing as landscape plants. How did they get here? 85% of all invasive plants were intentionally introduced for ornamental or landscape purposes. 14% of invasive plants were introduced for agricultural purposes. 1% for every other type of uses. Most non-native exotic plants are not invasive. For every plant species that is introduced, 10 become free-living exotics, means that they can live outside a cultivated area, while one becomes invasive. You can see where there's a multitude of communities, plant communities here in Georgia. On the upper left is a typical mid-slope forest. Upper right is a flooded plain levee forest. Lower left shows a Coosa prairie, and the lower right is a granite outcrop. And these are all different ecosystems that are troubled by invasive plants. How do invasive plants damage the environment? They compete with native species. They change the structure of the plant community, interfere with the natural ways that plant communities evolve, impact wildlife by altering the diversity of plant communities, affect the recreational benefits of an area. What are the characteristics of an invasive plant? They produce a lot of seed, effective dispersal methods, rapid maturity, rapid vegetative growth, long-lived, highly adaptable to a variety of habitats, easily established. Note, not all invasive plants have all of these characteristics, but they have at least one or more. Why are they so successful? Absence of natural predators. These invasive plants have evolved in areas over the thousands and millions of years that have been in a balance with the ecosystems in those areas. They're natural predators and parasites that keep them from growing out of control. But once they're removed from those places, the natural predators are no longer in existence. Most thrive on disturbed soil. Climate is similar to native habitat. Like a lot of plants you're going to see come from East Asia, China, and Japan. They have environments that are somewhat similar to the southeastern United States. And we'll start with, what we're going to start with is, first one up is Chinese privet, which is one of the worst invasive plants in our area. There are several different species, and distinguishing among them can be difficult. They form dense thickets invading fences, fields, fence rows, roadside forests, understories, and riparian zones. The areas around riparian zones are the areas around lakes and rivers and streams. They can shade out and exclude understory native species. Unlike this plant is far worse than kudzu in that kudzu cannot grow in shade, and this can grow in both shade and sun. Sometimes a plant's invasive potential is not immediately noticed. For example, Chinese privet was introduced around the year 1900 and was used as a landscape plant and hedges. And then over the years, it started increasing its population slowly up until the late 1950s, when its population exploded tremendously uh, across the decades, and it's one of the worst plants today. And many other plants have shown this type of characteristics. Another problem plant is Japanese honeysuckle, which is a woody evergreen to semi-evergreen vine that can found trailing or climbing up to over 80 feet. It invades a wide variety of habitats, including forest floors, canopies, roadsides, wetlands, and disturbed areas. It can girdle small saplings by twining around them and form dense mats in the canopies of trees, shading everything below. Native of Eastern Asia, and it was introduced into North America in the early 1800s to Long Island. It is one of it was widely planted throughout our country as an ornamental for erosion control and wildlife habitat. This is probably this covers some is the most acreages of any of our invasive plants, and I will show you at a chart later. Kudzu. This is probably the most famous and recognized of all the invasive plants in the southeast. They like to grow in disturbed areas, roadways, right-of-ways, forest edges, and fields. Again, it doesn't like shade, so it won't grow in shady areas as much. But where it does grow, it will just grow over everything, shades out, and smothers existing plants. It is a native to Asia and was introduced in the early 1900s as a way of erosion control. And over time, it has taken over large portions of the southeast. Japanese stilt grass, sometimes called Nepalese brown top or microstegium, is a delicate sprawling annual grass that can go up to about 3 feet in height. The stems can root at the nodes. They look like little tiny bamboo plants. Each plant can produce up to 1,000 seeds that remain viable in the soil for 5 or more years, meaning that the seeds that are produced this year may not germinate next year. Some of them could germinate 2, 3, 4, 5 years into the future. It's found a lot in ditches, forest edges, fields, trails. It's shade tolerant. It grows in riparian zones along streams and water banks. It's a native to Asia. Native to Asia and was introduced into North America in sometime around 1920. It was using as a packing material for porcelain, possibly explaining its accidental introduction. It is highly invasive. This is a wetlands area in the Mill Creek Nature Preserve in Beaufort, Georgia, near the Mall of Georgia. As you can see, that it can take over an area and crowd out all other forms of vegetation except the large trees. Golden bamboo is quite commonly seen around here. It is aggressive. It colonizes by underground stems called rhizomes. It's native to Asia, imported for ornamental value, and is still used for screening windbreaks, in some cases fishing poles. Infestations are commonly found around old home sites that can rapidly expand in size. It forms dense monocultural thickets that displace native species. Once the plant established, it is difficult to remove. It is native to China and was first introduced in the United States in 1882 for ornamental purposes. As you can see, that it has become serious. And a lot of times property owners will have conflicts, but one person complains that the other property owner is not controlling it. To control, you need to put something down as a barrier between for the rhizomes. A 12-inch piece of board or metal flashing dug in a trench and put it down where about maybe 3, 4 inches are sticking out. will help prevent the rhizomes from going over. For existing areas, cut the bamboo back, let it resprout, and hit it with Roundup. You will have to do that for several times before you get rid of it. Autumn olive um, is a dense evergreen shrub that invades natural areas throughout our area. It is short. It has sharp shoots, give it a thorny appearance. It can grow 3 to 4 feet tall, um, and has small clusters of sweet-smelling flowers that are white to light brown that develop in the spring. It prefers dry sites and is shade tolerant. And easily recognized by the silvery dotted undersides of its leaves. And often, this is probably will be in bloom by now, early May, late April, early May. And it has been widely planted for wildlife habitat and other reasons, and now it's quite invasive. It can form a dense shrub layer, displaces native species, and closes open areas, like many of the ones that we see. Thorny olive, Elaeagnus pungent, is one of the most common. It can grow 3 to 6 feet tall. Excuse me, 3 to 26 feet tall. It's multi-stem and short, sharp shoots give it a thorny appearance. Dense with long shoots extending from the top. They produce white flowers in the fall that are quite fragrant, and then little red olive-shaped fruits. Shade tolerant, invades both open and urban areas as well as forested areas. And like its cousin, the olive, the thorny olive, the fruit is dispersed by birds. You can see these plants a lot along roadsides. Chinese tallow tree is a serious invasive plant along Georgia's coastal plain, although it is not seen much up here. It dominates many wetlands. It is called popcorn trees because sometimes because its seeds look like popcorn when they're getting ready to fall off. It prefers stream banks, river banks, and ditches, but may also invade upland areas. Shade tolerant, flood tolerant, and unfortunately, it's being used as an ornamental plant because it does produce fall color, and a lot of the plants down on the coastal area do not. It can displace native vegetation as well as alter soil conditions to a high amount of tannins present in the leaf litter. Tannins is a chemical. This is another one in aquatic weeds. Hydrilla verticilla. Hydrilla. It is a submerged rooted aquatic plant that grow in water up to depths of 20 feet. It forms dense mass near the surface, which can restrict native vegetation, disrupt irrigation practices, interfere with recreational uses such as fishing, interferes with in reservoirs with hydroelectric productions and other issues. It is the most slow. It can invade most slow-moving or still water systems and is spread by birds, boats, and other similar ways. It is believed native to Asia and Africa, although it is widely spread across the globe. It was introduced as an aquarium plant and back in the 1950s. This is how a lot of invasive plants and animals get into our water bodies. They're used as aquarium plants and for ornamental fish ponds, and their owners carelessly dump them into the water bodies. Common water hyacinth is a free-floating aquatic plant that has invaded aquatic areas throughout our eastern and southeastern United States. It has showy purple-blue flowers borne on upright spokes. It reproduces mainly by vegetative means and can invade rivers, ponds, lakes, and other types of habitats. It can form dense moats of floating vegetation that can double in size in 2 weeks during the growing season. They restrict light to the underwater environment, reduce the light availability for submerged plants and aquatic organisms, and deplete oxygen level. A lot of times they can be seen in savanna growing along canals that you'll see down there. Anchored water hyacinth is a rooted perennial aquatic plant and has long stems which grow down to reach the surface from the surface water down to the soil, the bottom. Flowers are held in a erect stem above the water. There can be as many as up to 50 flowers per plant. Rapidly growing, can quickly form in dense mats of floating vegetation along large lakes. It competes. This complete coverage of the surface blocks sunlight and depletes oxygen like the common water hyacinth. It can make the water body uninhabitable by other organisms. It is anchored water hyacinth is listed as noxious weeds in the United States. It is not. The common water hyacinths can be sold, but not this one. Mimosa tree is a leguminous in the legume family. It is a small tree that can grow from 10 to 50 feet in height, having multiple trunks, invades disturbed habitat found in old fields, stream banks, and roadsides. It is difficult to remove due to long-lived seeds and its viability to resprout vigorously. It has widely been used as an ornamental, and its seeds are very long-lived. They can be viable in the soil for many years. It forms colonies from root sprouts and spreads by animal, and it can be dispersed by water and air as well, by blowing of the seeds. This also is not quite as bad as some of the other plants because there is a vascular fungus disease that will get it, that's infected, that slows its growth. Asian wisterias, there are a couple different types that grow wild that have become invasive. And as you can see, they can take over a tree and strangle it, smother the tree. It makes the trees more prone to being blown over by wind. It produces these fragrant light purple flowers in the summer. And there's a native type of wisteria that doesn't do this, but these invasive wisterias are quite problematic. As you can see on the left, how big those roots can get around trees, eventually smothering them. This one is very commonly seen, the English ivy. It grows in shade as well as sun, and can take over a whole area rather quickly. And especially in older areas, older neighborhoods, you'll see this. For example, in town around the Emory Druid Hills Fernbank area. English ivy, another problem with it is that it grows up trees. It can smother and kill trees. It also make it more prone to be blown over by wind. And control of it is somewhat challenging, but can be done. If it's growing up a tree, cut it off at the base of the tree, and what's growing up the tree will die and fall off. And it's areas where it is, you got a large thicket of it, like what's on the right here in this picture. Using Roundup to control it helps. Also, any chemical that has triclopyr in it, TRICLOPYR, like the Bayer Advanced Brush Killer Plus, is also quite effective in controlling English ivy, but 2 or 3 applications may be necessary before it's brought under control. Multiflora rose is a multi-stem thorny perennial shrub that can grow up to 15 feet tall. It has multiple color flowers, usually white, but sometimes are pink. It's aggressive, tenacious grower, growing over, around, and through shrubs and trees and forming thickets. Fruit is eaten and dispersed by birds, and it forms impenetrable thickets and pastures, forests, and forest edges. tolerates a wide range of conditions, allowing it to invade multiple areas. Um, the arching canes will root where their tips touch the ground. Um, it was often imported for ornamental purposes and off back decades ago touted as a living fence and used as a crash barrier in the median of highways and windbreaks. In South Georgia, there are some weeds that are more specific to those areas, some invasive plants. One is the the giant reed grass that has escaped. It forms large, dense clumps along roadsides and forest margins. Its underground roots are spreaded by rolled shoulder grading. It can grow up to 12 feet tall, 15 feet tall. It resembles golden bamboo, but prefers more upland sites. It is sometimes called cemetery grass because it is often planted as an ornamental and screening for old cemeteries. And sometimes people have looked at it and mistaken it as corn until you look and see the growth pattern is different. This is one of the most serious invasive plants that we're having to deal with, Kogon grass. It is very common in the southern part of the state, the southwestern part of the state. It is extremely aggressive invader. It can invade a wide range of sites. It forms dense, usually circular infestations that will exclude other vegetation. It is native to Southeast Asia and was accidentally introduced to the southeastern United States in the early 1900s as packing material. What happens is this takes over an area, it crowds out in native plants, and it becomes very dry during the summer months. It spreads rapidly through rhizomes and seeds. The rhizomes often have sharp points on them that can puncture tires. As it gets dry, it's more susceptible to burning. And if there are controlled burns or forest fire, it burns at much higher temperatures than what's the normal brush, thus causing damage to trees for forestry production. This is an area around Stone Mountain Park in 2008. It was discovered, and the Georgia Forestry Commission at no charge will come in and eradicate it. But most of the Kogon grasses in the southern, especially the southwestern part of the state, it's a problem of southern Alabama and Mississippi and down in Florida. There have only been a few cases like this one at Stone Mountain back in 2008 in North Georgia. Here's a map of the infestations. As you can see, it's severe in southern Alabama and Mississippi. You see some counties along the southwestern part of Georgia and in Florida. Japanese climbing fern is a fern that reproduces by spores. It can grow from open habitats to forests. It forms a dense, thick mass that smothers trees and shrubs. The spores are dispersed by wind and rain. And sometimes this will get into pine straw that you get at garden centers. It doesn't appear to be problematic in North Georgia as of right now, but in South Georgia, it can be serious. And the thing about it is when they're having forest fires or controlled burns, the fire can go up these plants and burn the crowns of trees, causing serious problems to the trees. Another one, you may remember last week when I talked about the horse nettle weed here in North Georgia. I mentioned it had a cousin, the Tropica soda apple, which is common in parts of South Georgia. It can grow up to 6 feet tall. It has leaves and branches that have sharp spines on them. And it also produces this a little tomato-like fruit that's not edible. It was included on the federal noxious weed list in 1995. Seeds are eaten by livestock and wildlife, and dispersal occurs by the animals, as well as contaminated manure and hay. It forms thick stands are impenetrable to livestock, large wildlife, and people. Once established, dispersal to other areas can be rapid, such as this picture. We have some invaders here in North Georgia we have to be concerned about. They're problematic. The royal paulownia, or princess tree, or empress tree. It's found on old home sites, roadsides, near riverbanks, and it spreads by seeds that are dispersed by wind and water. Getting rid of princess tree can be a problem because it sprouts from buds on stems and roots, and it thrives in marginal areas such as rocky slopes. The tree was promoted for commercial production of fast-growing wood. It produces messy, sticky seeds that can be problematic, drops a lot of leaves, and in some cases it's still sold. Here's another picture of the princess tree. Amur honeysuckle is several exotic bush honeysuckles. It was used for wildlife cover, erosion controls, ornamental. Once established, it competes like other for nutrients and light like other invasive plants. Its seeds are readily spread by birds and small animals. This tends to be more problematic in the Athens-Clarke County area. Seen a lot of it. It grows quite rapidly and quite invasive over there. Other parts of the state, it can be problematic as well. And there are cases of it here in Metro Atlanta. Oriental bittersweet is a fast-growing vine that covers and kills other plants, smothering them, girdling them. It can be found in both shade and sun, and the small birds and small animals disperse the seeds. The vines and their attractive berries have been traditionally collected as home decorations in winters. Then the discarded decorations is another way that the seeds have been dispersed. China berry originally comes from China. It was originally planted as ornamental trees around old home sites, forms colonies from root sprouts. Long-lasting berries are dispersed by birds that are poisonous to humans and livestock. Frequently, they can be seen growing along sides of the road, growing along wood fences, and they are poisonous. They produce purple lavender flowers in the spring, and if you look on the left, you can see the berries that are produced, and they're very visible on the trees during the winter months after it loses its leaves. Tree of heaven is another troublesome tree. A plant as young as 2 years can produce viable seeds that are dispersed by wind and water. Roots produces chemicals that discourage other plants from growing. It's something called allelopathy, which is when a plant is able to prevent other plants from growing around it or reduce their ability. A prime example is the walnut trees that are known for doing this. Well, Tree of Heaven does this as well. The trees can often be in abandoned and collapsed buildings. They can be seen growing in the cracks. Miscanthus is an ornamental grass that can take over areas. At times, here in the Metro Atlanta area, it's not much of a problem, but it can be in other areas of the country. Once established, the plant is adaptable to harsh areas from wet to very dry, and unattended areas along roadsides and forests where it's a problem, it can be a fire hazard. This is up here in Asheville, North Carolina. in that area. You can see how it's just taken over everything, and that can be a real fire hazard. Here's one close to home that we're seeing a lot of. They've been blooming, are their Bradford pears. Bradford pears have a notorious reputation for being poor growing trees, that the soft, uh, fast growing wood, it forms at the right angle crotches that are narrow, and branches and parts of the trees will break off. The flowers can have produced an unpleasant odor. They also hybridize with other pear trees and produce seeds that are dispersed into the environment through animals and through the wind. You can see large thickets of these trees growing in natural areas, and the large amounts of blossoms in the spring. These invasive trees can produce thorns as well, and they're becoming more and more problematic, which is another reason to not plant Bradford pears, and if you do, have them cut down and removed. The big leaf magnolias, we're all familiar with that. We think of that as a native tree, but actually it's native to South Georgia and can be somewhat invasive here in North Georgia. As you can see, this thicket of native big leaf magnolia growing. This is at the Monastery of the Holy Spirit in Conyers, which is, and they are dispersed through seeds. Birds will spread the seeds. Leatherleaf mahonias, this is becoming a far more problematic invasive weed. I am increasingly seeing this in natural areas becoming more problematic. This was taken down there by, the picture was down near Wesley Woods. Emory University's got a lot. Our Rock Eagle 4-H camp down in Eatonton has got a large infestation of this growing in the woods around it and on the property. Best to get rid of this. Do not plant them, and just get rid of them if you have them. A recent survey of almost 25 million forested acres in Georgia found acreages occupied by the following invasive plants. Over 920,000 acres of Japanese honeysuckle, followed by privet and Japanese stiltgrass, where you can see kudzu is down there on 5th on the list. Everyone thinks of invasive plants, they think of kudzu, whereas there are others that are worse. I briefly cover invasive plants in other areas of the country. The Melaleuca tree is a serious problem down in the Everglades. They form dense, penetrable monocultures, thickets that are difficult for wildlife and people to enter. They crowd out native vegetation and completely smother any native plants growing in that area. Another one is the Brazilian pepper tree, which is becoming increasingly problematic in Florida. It was a few years ago, a population was discovered on Jekyll Island, Georgia. And fortunately, it was discovered, and Georgia Forestry Commission controlled and eradicated it. Most likely, it had been growing there for quite some time before it was discovered, which is a case of a lot of these invasive species. I'll mention this when I get into insects and diseases. These problems can be here in us before they're formally identified. The Brazilian pepper tree, along with the Melaleuca, are serious in the Everglades, and another environmental problem to that treasure of a swamp, the national park that they're having to face, among many other issues. Purple loosestrife is another invasive plant. It particularly likes wetlands, and highly invasive nature allows it to form dense, homogeneous stands. And a lot of these wetlands, of course, are habitats for waterfowl or rare plants. As you can see, large areas overrun by purple loosestrife. Not much of a problem here in North Georgia, but up in Tennessee and Kentucky, it is a problem. I'm aware of some issues around the Nashville area that's having problems with purple loosestrife. As you can see, why it was brought into this country, it was for its ornamental qualities. Nice garden plant, but highly invasive. Another one is the hogweed. Um, this looks like a giant Queen Anne's lace. We talked about that in weeds last week. Queen Anne's lake, if Queen Anne's laces you see growing. The thing is, this can grow 12 to 15 feet tall or higher, and it produces a sap that can cause serious dermatitis or eye damage if it gets in the eye, similar to poison ivy. Um, it is native to the Caucasus Mountains of Russia. It has not been discovered in Georgia. It has been found up in parts of the Northeast, areas around Chicago, and there have been a few isolated pockets of it in the mountains of North Carolina and Virginia. So far, as I said, it hasn't been discovered in Georgia, but it doesn't mean it's not here, and most likely it would be up in the mountainous areas. However, that's not an absolute certainty. So if you see something that looks like a giant hogweed, contact your extension agent. Make a difference, plant only non-invasive species, remove invasive plants from your land, do not trade potentially invasive plants with other gardeners. Design gardens compatible with regional ecosystems. Help educate your community, other gardeners in your area. Volunteer to assist in control of invasive plants. This is an example that I found out of the Farmer's Almanac a few years ago. The Empress tree or the Royal Princess tree, the Paulownia. See that? Zooms to a flowering scented shade tree in just one season. As low as $3.98 per seed per tree. Zoom up to 12 feet in one season. Rises up to 65 feet. Produces bouquets of richly scented flowers and spreads up to 30 feet tall. A king's ransom for only $3.98 per tree. Turn a bare lot into a royal estate. This is the type of stuff that we want to educate people. And this type of whoever Rush Industries is just trying to make quick money. This is something that you do not want to have. Certain websites that may be of interest to you to learn more. That Bugwood has some excellent pictures of invasive plants and great information on it. Give you a few seconds to take it down, this information. All right. Normally I would, in the class, I have a couple boxes full of these publications I was going to bring to you. Unfortunately, due to the fact that we're shut down, you can get this. I got these posted on, I got these on the Google Drive site that you can access. And it has information. It goes into more detail than this presentation for your information. And so check that out. There's my contact information. And we'll proceed with the next section following. All right, we're moving on to the next, our emergent invasive insects and diseases of ornamentals. I have this separate from the plants because they're to separate this out. We're going to talk about mainly insects and diseases. Those are the other categories of invasives. We can also mention that things like there are certain species of snails and animals, mammals. Like you think about wild hogs, those are invasive and becoming more of a problem, even in urban areas. This one is the emerald ash borer. Was discovered in southeastern Michigan near Detroit in 2002. Small, elongated oval beetle that are green and metallic. It attacks ash trees, or Fraxinus species, and then it hits the top and then moves down the tree. The adults do a little nibbling on the foliage, but cause little harm. It's the larva that they lay, and the creamy white larval stage feeds below the bark and cuts of the living water and nutrient conducting vessels, causing the tree death. Um, it is a problematic, and as a larva pupates and emerges as an adult, it creates this little D-shaped hole. Um, this is pictures of the larva. Um, it takes between 1 and 2 years, depending on the climate, feed on the vascular tissue and make serpentine galleries that girdle and kill trees. Mature larvae tunnel into sapwood and they begin to pupate. And they can be a single generation in the northern states and multiple generations in southern states. It was first identified here in Georgia back in 2013 and has spread to other counties. It started in Fulton, DeKalb, and has spread to other counties. Most likely this insect has been here for some time before it was first identified, which is the case with a lot of these pests. This is what it looks like on a tree. It begins to die from the top down. But here in Georgia, less than 1% of our trees are ash trees. So it may not be as problematic as it is in areas that have large numbers of ash trees, but it's still a problem. And is becoming increasingly, they're spreading throughout the country. This is a pheromone trap that they use to monitor emerald ash borers. Pheromone traps are used in many different monitorings, and if you see something like this is a little purple one that they use for the emerald ash borer, but there's many other ones that they use to monitor. Do not disturb them, because that's what the entomologists and people from the Forestry Service are doing to see if we have problems with these invasive insects. Little information right here. You can go to the www.gatrees.org. Some more information on from our Georgia Forestry Commission on emerald ash borers. Just showing you where they are. The Cyrex wood wasp was detected near Detroit, Michigan in the late 1990s. It's now spread to 14 other states and Canadian provinces, and it's expanding. It carries a female, excuse me, I was wrong bug. I was talking more about the emerald ash borer. Cyrex wood wasp, females, they carry a fungus that lay on trees when laying their eggs. The fungus and the chemical around it, injected by the wasp, rapidly weaken and kill trees. And the larvae feed on the fungus. This is the case with a lot of these insects. They have a fungus that they inject into a tree when they lay their eggs, and the larvae feed on it. A lot of trees are like this. And using a systemic insecticide like imidacloprid, which is in a lot of the Bayer Advanced products, the plant absorbs it and the insecticide's in there, but it won't hurt the larva, because the larva is feeding on the fungus and not the wood. It was believed to be shipped in this country in packing material, wood packing material. It was first detected in New York in 2004 and spread throughout parts of the Northeast. It's insect trees, especially loblolly and Monterey pines. The pines weaken and die due to the fungus. And is also transferred by firewood. Causes tree mortality up to 80%. It is not in the southern states, but could potentially be. Here's the move in our area. This is a picture of it ovipositing. That means it's laying its eggs in a tree. And this is showing you indicators of the attack. As you can see, a fungal stain. Some of these you'll see with that. It's dripping resin in the emergence hole. Trees affected by that. This is the range it has as of 2019. This is county level, showing you where they are. And it's expanding its range. Again, just because it hasn't been found here in our area doesn't mean it's not here. The Asian longhorn beetle is another troublemaker here. It is this beetle was found in up in the Northeast and in areas around New York City and Chicago back in the late 1990s. You can see where it is noticeable. It has those long antennas, hence where it gets the name. And it is, you can see what it does is that it goes into the tree, it pupates, the larva damages the tree, girdling it, and you can see where it pupates. The beetle comes out and lays its eggs, and it causes death to a variety of ornamental shade trees. This is in Brooklyn, New York, where a large, you can see where on the left is where the trees, pictures of the trees that were taken one year, and a year or two later on the picture on the right. They had to be cut down and removed. It's a problem, especially in the New York City area, areas around Chicago, and some sites in Massachusetts. Showing you the range. It doesn't show that much. It just shows you can see around New York, Long Island, around Chicago, and in Massachusetts. Of course, this is a very old map. It says 2010, so most likely it spread further since then. Gypsy moths. If you're from the Northeast or Mid-Atlantic state, you probably know this. Is introduced is a highly destructive insect pest of a variety of trees. It was introduced in Massachusetts in the 1860s. Somebody thought they were silk moths, brought them in, and they really didn't produce a lot of silk, but they got loose and have created a tremendous amount of damage. It causes indirectly causing mortality of susceptible trees by heavy defoliation of the larva. The larva will eat the leaves year after year. That causes the tree to weaken and die. Tree mortality may result from 1 year defoliation. The hemlock, pines, and spruce, they eat both deciduous and evergreen, broadleaf and needle leaves. Deciduous trees can normally withstand 1 year of defoliation, but 2 or more successive years can result to a high mortality rate. So is this again? I'll say it again. It hasn't been discovered in Georgia, but doesn't mean it's not here. This is showing you the current. As you see, it's already moved into North Carolina. So some experts have said by 2025 it will be in Georgia. Red Bay ambrosia beetle, laurel wilt disease. This is it was imported into South Georgia in 2002 into the Savannah area by wooden crates and pallets. The adult female red bay ambrosia beetle carries a special pouch in its mouth. The spores of the fungus, laurel wilt disease, is released. As the beetle bores into the wood, forms galleries, the spores inoculate the tree, germinate and grow, and colonize the outer wood, the sapwood of the host plant. It blocks the water movement of trees and water and nutrients in the tree. You can see down in the coastal areas, the red bay, all these big red bay trees are dying. I know I've seen it down there along Tardy Island, on Wilmington Island, Skidaway Island, Jekyll and St. Simons have got a real problem with that. The thing about it is that this insect, as you can see where it gets into the tree and eventually it causes the crown to start to wilt and die. And you'll notice that the vascular system, you can see this one right here in the where it's cut on the bottom left. You see that discoloration, and that's very endemic, very characteristic of it. This is showing you where it has expanded since 2004. This is 2015, which is probably a little further now. The concern is you see it down in Florida. Red bays in the laurel family and avocados in that family. And that crop is being threatened. Another one is the sassafras tree, which we have here in North Georgia, but it's seen not been that problematic on the sassafras, which is a minor understory tree. Another problem is hemlock woolly adelgid, which is well known. Hemlock trees are a foundation species of forest, long-living, shade-tolerant conifers that grow in groups or assembled with other trees. They can grow in shady as well as sun. They contribute to water shed quality and provide a unique microenvironment with a cool habitat for many species of birds, insects, fish, and mammals. They get into the trees. As you can see, these little adelgids, which are related to aphids, they form these little masses around where the needles and branches come together, and can cause causes tree mortality, such as this example of a tree that a forest where a lot of hemlock trees have died as a result. That problem is that in a lot of these areas, there are trees that shade rivers and streams that make it cool water for trout in large numbers. And if these trees are starting to die off, those cool waters can become warm waters and trout less able to survive. The cooler waters allows for higher oxygen, and trout need higher oxygen. So die off of these trees could potentially mean die off of trout populations. They have been used with a control. There has been some control efforts with what we call injected insecticides into the ground, with systemic insecticides that are absorbed, and as the insect bites into it, the tree, the insecticides there, and kills the insect. Spring soil injections work the best in the springtime. This is showing you their range. It's as in North Georgia, but a little more problematic north of here. Another one is the brown marmorated stink bug. Was first observed in Pennsylvania in 2001. It's become a major agricultural pest similar to other stink bugs. It is also a household nuisance. It gets into fruits and harms a lot of, they have pure-sucking types of mouth parts. Stink bugs use these mouth parts in a straw-like fashion by piercing the fruits, causing dead spots on the fruits and leaf surfaces as well. And also it can cause secondary infestations and infections of diseases, and scarring as the fruit matures. Here are homeowners congregating on the side of a house in Illinois. As you can see, they're very problematic. And getting into homes, again, it can be a real nuisance. This is their range. Kudzu bugs were first detected in 2009 in Barrow, Jackson, and Oconee counties. I was involved with that, the first detection, and they just started appearing around kudzu, and they're like the brown marmorated stink bugs. They became problematic of gathering around people's houses on the sides and getting into homes. It was recognized as something called a bean plantispid uh, bug. It's another name for it, and it was never been seen in the Western Hemisphere until um, until the kudzu bug got into this country. The concern is it feeds on leguminous plants, and that includes soybean. And it's become somewhat a problem, as you can see this on soybean right here, these bugs, and also where they get on people's homes. This is the population, how they spread. However, their population seems to have crashed where they're not as noticeable now. I suspect that some type of fungus or some natural controls are getting them. How they got into this country, we believe it was brought in up to some of those warehouses up along I-85 and got loose and became a problem in the environment. Spotted lanternfly is another one that's becoming a problem up in Pennsylvania. It was noticed, it was detected there back in 2014. It You can see it looks like it might have looked like a butterfly, but it's not. It's like a plant hopper, a giant plant hopper, a much larger plant hop type of insect. It does have colorful wings. It has a pure-sucking mouth parts and has caused a lot of damage to fruit trees. It's attacked some of the orchard plants as well as other desirable trees in Pennsylvania. Is mainly where it's centered, although there have been reported populations in other areas. And it seems to be particularly liking to be with tree of heaven, which I talked about earlier in the invasive plant is an exotic plants is an invasive plant. So an invasive insect that feeds on this, which doesn't really hurt the tree of heaven, but keeping these trees cut down and controlled helps reduce this pest. This is its life cycle. As you can see, it has what we call incomplete metamorphosis, where the immature form looks like a miniature adult. This is the current range of 2000. You can see where the quarantine, where it's most severe, and then there have been found other areas that have been found, but have not been. There's no infestation as of yet. So you can see where parts of most serious in southeastern Pennsylvania, parts of New Jersey, and northern Delaware. And they're really telling us to watch out for this because it can spread, it can potentially spread throughout the country. Another one is the thousand canker disease. It mainly hits walnuts. And the insect, a beetle, penetrates it and gets in there, and the fungus causes all these little cankers to form that can cause the tree to perish over time. It's another example of insects and fungal symbiotic relationship. It's caused by this little insect, just a few millimeters long. It's related to pine bark beetles and the Asia ambrosia beetle and the red bay ambrosia beetle. Small insects, but they can do a tremendous amount of damage. There's showing you a picture of the beetle right there, and a walnut tree deteriorating because of it. It's seen up in Tennessee, but has been found a few isolated spots in North Georgia, up in Tennessee, but it's more problematic out in the western part of the country. As you can see, the most common black walnut is very susceptible, but it's something that's being carefully monitored. Firewood. This is very important. A lot of these insects are on trees, and they infest wood, and it can be spread by taking firewood. So if you take firewood out of Illinois, you could be bringing more emerald ambrosia beetles, which which of course are already here. Also, let's say you're bringing firewood in from Pennsylvania, you could be bringing the spotted lanternfly. Do not transport firewood from one part of the country to another. That is, if you're going to go camping in Pennsylvania, just use local sources of firewood and don't bring any back to Georgia, and vice versa, because that's what brings these insects and spreads them. So avoid, buy it where you burn it. Just use local sources. Boxwood blight, there's a few ornamental ones we'll discuss. As was detected about 10 years ago, and has attacked boxwoods and causes them to die. The spores are real sticky. They can stick to clothing and other objects. Be aware that removing the disease box of leaf disease will not eradicate the blighted pathogen from the location, since that produces spores that can live in the soil 5 or 6 years. Best thing to do if you have a boxwood, there are some preventative fungicides that can be sprayed on it to help reduce the likelihood. Do not recommend that you plant boxwoods. Look for alternatives like hollies. This is what the boxwood blight looks like. It produces these black stripes on the branches and discoloration of the leaves. This is an example of boxwoods being defoliated and killed by the disease. It was first detected here in Georgia in 2014, planting in Buckhead, and has since become more problematic. Another issue that's on impatiens has become more of an issue is the impatiens downy mildew. This is on the common impatiens. The mildew gets on and causes the death of impatiens populations. As you can see right here, there are some chemical fungicides that can be used to apply, which are more for commercial than for homeowners. We're recommending that you, instead of using patience, use other plant material, other ornamental plants that can take shady areas, like the New Guinea or sun patience, which can go both in sun and shade, is an excellent choice. Rose rosette disease. It's been common on knockout roses and other roses. It is spread by the Eriophid mite, which is microscopic. You can't see it with your with the naked eye, and there's no chemicals to control it. It spreads the virus, and once it gets in the plant, it causes this distorted growth. It's another picture of it, distorted growth, and there's nothing that can be done. In time, it will cause the plant to deteriorate and potentially die. The only thing you can do is remove the plant and don't replace any roses there for at least another year. So that ends the topic on invasive species. Just remember the important concepts about you don't want to introduce invasive species, whether they be plants or insects or diseases. Knowledge of this and knowledge of their spread will help control the troubles they cause. It is becoming an increasingly more serious problem, and needs to be more emphasis needs to be put on it. This concludes this presentation.